Welcome to the webinar, How Heat Experiences Accelerate Learning, which is presented today by Chris Watts of the Center for Creative Leadership. My name is Tracy Dobbins, and I'll serve as your event host today. If you're just getting to know us, CCL is a top-ranked provider of executive education globally. We work with 2/3 of the world's top 500 companies, small business, and government, providing innovative solutions for the entire organization and programs proven to transform the individual. Our work is based on significant research from our own elite teams to the finest global sources, and we share it readily with you today in this discussion. Today's webinar is our 7th topic in our new Thought Leadership series, Future Fluency. We'll continue to offer more content on this topic and many others that are relevant to preparing yourself and your organization to lead in the future. Today we're asking you to participate in a chat conversation during the next hour. I wanted to mention that if you check out our Twitter feed right now at twitter.com/ccl.org, we're conducting some live polls on this topic. If you participate in one of the polls, like the tweet, and follow us, you'll be automatically entered to win a free CCL gift. Today we'll have a formal question and answer session at the end of the webinar, and so please send your questions into the chat box throughout the session. I'd like to introduce now our presenter, Chris Watts. Chris is a senior faculty member at the Center for Creative Leadership. For 16 years, Chris has influenced senior leaders to continuously transform themselves and their organizations in rapid growth organizations. Having led high-stakes strategic initiatives across 40+ countries, Chris is constantly experimenting with how to help leaders and their organizations scale faster. Chris is currently a senior faculty member at CCL, where he builds and delivers highly unique leadership development experiences. He also works with senior teams to help them navigate their leadership challenges more effectively. Welcome, Chris.
Chris, you may be on mute on your end.
Thank you, Tracy, for that introduction. We're going to start off today with a bit of an audience reflection, and today we're going to cover the latest and greatest techniques out there that we've seen around how to use heat experiences to drive transformational learning. And we're going to start by having you reflect on what was a heat experience in your career. And so I'll walk you through just a couple of questions to think about, and then we'd love to have you give your response in the chat room by replying to all participants. So think about a time in your career when you faced a very challenging assignment. You might have felt extremely challenged, perhaps at key moments, feeling overwhelmed and afraid to make the next move. And what characterizes heat the most is being stressed almost to your breaking point, kind of bending but not breaking. As you look back on that experience, what did you learn and was it worth it? In the chat area, if you could describe that question, what did you learn and was it worth it, in perhaps 8 sentences or 8 words or less. It'll be great just to have everyone quickly share an example in their own experience before we dive into heat best practices. So I'll just take 20 seconds and wait as those of you reflect and start adding something to the chat room.
See some responses coming in now. Challenge, learn to trust myself, manage stress.
Executing a reorganization. So we're going to explore how you get the upside of heat and not the downside of heat. Sometimes heat experiences can be mentally taxing. Sometimes they can be emotionally confusing, perhaps leading a layoff or a restructure like one of the participants has mentioned. And sometimes they can even be physically demanding, where you're working long nights and hours. I'm seeing some things here where leading company-wide initiatives and learning how to plan and influence more effectively. Heat comes with amazing benefits if we can leverage it correctly. And that's what we're going to explore today, if you get it right. So heat has powerful impacts at two levels. One, for the individuals or teams going through the heat experience. It can be a career-defining moment for them. It can accelerate huge leaps in how they learn, and it can force them to make serious adaptations in their leadership style that make them more effective across a broader range of audiences. And if you use heat experiences well, it can create executive readiness. But if you don't use them well, it can lead to burnout and retention problems. We're studying heat and learning it also has an impact at the organizational level. If you're using it well across multiple teams in multiple places, it can create agility in your leadership culture and make you ready to reposition as things shift in your marketplace. You can use it to leverage change initiatives and people development to happen simultaneously. And it can help develop bench strength across your organization in key regions that need new forms of leadership most. Or if it's not managed properly, it can rage like a wildfire and create retention problems. So today we're going to explore and define what heat experiences are, what are the key components that make them hot, and how can you leverage those components to optimize success rates. We're going to clarify what happens to the brain and some of the neuroscience of heat and how heat can influence learning and results. Then we're going to explore ways to get the temperature right so we're extracting maximum learning and we're not getting that burnout that we want to avoid. And we're going to explore pioneering ways heat is being used in practice settings so that you can simulate what we're calling safe heat, or a place where you can take risks and learn from them and not suffer massive consequences, but still reap the rewards. So let's get to that definition of the heat experience. And I'm still seeing people providing wonderful examples in the chat room, which are fascinating. A heat experience is a stressful assignment that pushes you to stretch and grow, and it forces you to find ways to adapt to be more successful. Common themes that we've seen across heat experiences is people, the leader themselves or the teams they're leading, because it's important to note that if a leader is in a stretch assignment, so is their team. The team can feel vulnerable and sometimes overmatched for the challenge if the heat is too high, or if the heat represents complexities they're not used to navigating before. What we're also finding is a common theme is you have to persevere through a number of painful missteps. It's usually not a linear process of learning. It's usually you try some new things, you take some risks. Those risks don't always go as you hope, and you have to learn from them and recalibrate the next steps you're going to take. And it's this key thing that has to happen, where you're extracting insights real time by debriefing, that drives the learning potential and the transformation potential for the leader and also for the business. So with that definition of heat experiences, let's talk about where they can exist. It can be part of the work. It can be a stretch assignment that is given to a leader or a team trying to do new and bigger things. They could be trying to lead a turnaround of a product, a division, a region. They could be elevating their responsibility to increase in scope, so moving from a mid-manager level role to an executive role, or moving to manage a couple of teams to now managing a division across a region. Or it can just be heat that comes from the constant change initiative that you're either creating and implementing or adopting that are being created and you're having to adapt to yourself. So heat can come from part of the work, but there's another place that we're excited to talk about and explore and see common themes, and that's on the practice field. And this is a safe place where you can take risks and learn from them and debrief the missteps of them. And we're going to spend the second half of this presentation exploring more about that. And those come in the form of games, simulations, and expeditions. So what are the key levers that turn up the heat, the critical components that drive heat levels? Because these are important to consider if you're going to be giving a stretch assignment to a leader and team. The first is this concept of, is the challenge they're facing unfamiliar, and will there be lots of unknowns? How new or unique is this challenge? If it's new, people will not know what stressors to anticipate, and as a result, the team or the stakeholders involved will likely have conflict about which way to go next when missteps arise. And so the level of disagreement will increase proportionally with the level of unknowns the team is unused to dealing with. The second variable or driver that's important to consider when giving a stretch assignment that has heat is complexity. How difficult is it to find answers, and how much information do we need to sift through to make decisions? As unfamiliarity increases and complexity increases, so does this third variable, which is the fear of failure or vulnerability. And this comes with how risky is it if we make a mistake? How high stakes is this initiative that we're leading for me, for the team, and for the organization? And we're finding by getting acutely familiar with these three aspects of heat, these are not the only variables that turn up the heat, but they're the three that we can pay attention to and leverage and identify levels of heat easiest. The more that you get familiar with these, the better you can find the right support that people need to drive learning from the heat. So let's talk for a second about what are some of the bold ways that organizations are intentionally using heat to drive learning for their leaders. The first, number one, is where they're asking leaders to head a change initiative where that leader or that team has no prior expertise, where they cannot be an expert. We've seen this used in healthcare, humanitarian, and technology companies. What's fascinating about it, especially with some healthcare companies, is they've asked doctors who are well steeped in a certain expertise to lead change and to lead adoption of a change in an area where they have no formal specialization. And this forces that doctor, who is also a leader, to collaborate and totally shift the way that they try to get people to listen to them. So instead of being the expert and using your authority to drive adoption, to drive commitment to a change, they have to do a lot different forms of listening because they don't have all the technical details mastered. So this use of heat often drives learning and transformational shifts in how leaders approach, fundamentally, their role as a leader. The second way we've seen heat used in organizations, especially in fast-moving companies, is merging two different product lines to be led by one talented leader. And when this happens, it's often for the benefit of the leader as much as for the organization. One example of this that I think is exciting to talk about and important to talk about is when you're merging two business units that don't make a lot of rational sense to merge, primarily to give leaders experience with complexity. Team meetings become incredibly difficult to navigate. How do we come up with a shared direction? And so the heat comes from, how do I find a shared direction for these merged units that don't seem to have congruent goals? And we're seeing organizations intentionally do this to develop their leaders to be able to manage multiple things at once and find ways to drive alignment and collaboration levels when it's not intuitive. The third way we're seeing organizations use heat is giving people experience safe practice hours in wildly unfamiliar terrain with minimal training. We'll talk a bit more about this one at the end. For instance, asking leaders to be part of a sailing fleet where they have no prior sailing experience and they have to sail a boat and a series of boats to do parallel maneuvers in chaotic weather conditions. By doing this, they're asking teams to build trust quickly, collaborate quickly, and deal with things of which they don't have prior intuitive knowledge. This can be quite similar to when you have to lead a wildly unfamiliar transformation in your organization. And by organizations using all three of these types of heat, it gives people a chance to stretch their leadership style into a very different form of leading. So we talked a little bit about the macro uses of heat. Let's explore the micro experiences of heat. And to do that, I'm going to share a bit about my biggest heat assignment of my career, early in my career as a senior leader. It was the first assignment for me to lead a transformational, disruptive change across the globe. I'd led change before, but it was new to me to lead change at a global level, and it was new to me to lead a change that was primarily a technology shift for how to share information across 90 different offices more effectively. What was interesting about this assignment, where the heat became really hot, was It was a disruptive change that had failed 3 times before by prior leaders, and it was something our industry had never tried to use this new solution before. So it was a cutting-edge, pioneering approach to using a new technology to optimize the way we shared information across almost 90 countries. So for me, there was what we call a new on new on new factor that increased the heat. It was a new global assignment. It was a new time we're trying to create this type of change and this scope of change. And it was a new technology that our industry had never used. In addition, we are experiencing some turnover on the team. For some people, the heat was too much and they were leaving. And so not only did we have new technologies and a new scope of change, but also new team members to have to orient and get onto the same page. And at one point when it felt most overwhelming, a mentor was something that my boss thought I could use and benefit from, and a mentor was assigned. And the mentor helped me see things and see my options in a totally different way. They helped me know how to re-engage with my team, more effectively share status updates with the executive steering committee, and helped me much more effectively find collaborative solutions by listening to the key stakeholders instead of coming with my best ideas and sharing my ideas first. And so the micro experience of heat can look like this. It looks like this in my heat experience, and it looks like this in many of the heat experiences that we work with of leaders, that as the discomfort level increases, intense emotions can increase. That can either lead to better learning opportunities or lead to the inability to learn. The mentor helped me when I was at a state of almost burnout on the right side of this graph, feeling a bit of panic at times and feeling a bit of overwhelmed states at times. At a couple points, a few people were fired on the change project I was leading, and that's when intense emotions started to spread across the team and across the key stakeholders. Although we course corrected over time, it was the mentor who helped me move back on this curve to stay engaged in a place of learning rather than to let my emotions get the best of me, cloud my judgment, and narrow and give me tunnel vision. And this experience is actually what, because of the transformation I went through as a leader, inspired me to go into the field of leadership development and out of senior management. What's been exciting while being in the field of leadership development is seeing more about the neuroscience of heat. And that first, when certain parts of the brain experience intense emotions, there can be tunnel vision and there can be a narrowing of options, and people can't see everything that they could do to try to make things go better in the midst of a misstep. Painful memories are stored longer. Some research has said painful memories are stored 10 times faster and 10 times longer than positive memories. And so if you've taken a misstep in a heat experience, you're going to remember it. And when you come into another experience in the future that feels like a trigger, you might have a false alarm about how much danger there is, and you might quickly get a tunnel vision, quickly show your sense of panic or feeling overwhelmed, and that can spread because of mirror neurons across other people on the team, which can build or break trust. And so we're finding that it's really important for learning to be engaged and to stay engaged, that you stay in this learning sweet spot. And what drives people to stay in that learning sweet spot, we're calling adequate support. When there is a coach or a mentor or a peer or a resource that you can turn to at critical moments, we're finding the chances of navigating heat successfully exponentially increase. In my experience, I didn't ask for help, and that was one of my biggest takeaways when I look back and debriefed it more with my mentor who played the role of a coach with me. I didn't reach out for help because I didn't want to look like there was something wrong. And so there may be a lot of people in heat experiences in your organization who are feeling that same thing, that I'm not sure if I should ask for help because I don't want to look weak. But it's actually help that helps them extract learning from their experience better and to avoid the negative side effects of their brain and the neuroscience of their brain overheating. However, we're finding the type of support that makes the most benefit can depend on the heat level and how teams are reacting emotionally to that heat. So to ground ourselves in what the outcomes of the heat might be before we jump into the best practices, there can be a heat experience that leads to project success, the organization's leading some change, and it gets the change it wants to see happen, and or development success. The leader and the team involved can go through a transformation of how they operate and shift to become more versatile in how they lead. So we're going for, and the best practices that we've been gathering over the last 5 to 7 years are going for trying to create win-wins. But sometimes you can create a win-lose, where the change initiative is successful, but the leader burns out, or the leader doesn't feel psychologically safe because of some of the resistance they encountered, and they're a little bit hesitant to take big risks in the future for the organization. I'm currently mentoring a leader right now who's leading a transformational change. The change is successful, the organization's benefiting from it, but because of some of the resistance they experienced at senior levels where they did not expect it the most, and because they didn't feel like people had their back, they lost psychological safety. And the heat increases exponentially when you don't have psychological safety. And so now they're a bit hesitant to take further risks for the benefit of the organization. And so we're about to explain and share the best practices that we believe drive win-wins for the people involved as well as for the business itself. And sometimes the process of learning from a heat experience can be a bit clunky, a bit awkward looking, as this picture illustrates, but that the more intense a heat experience, we believe the more support a team needs to give them a cocoon, a safe cocoon, for them to extract insights and to extract learning. So for a second, before we dive into those best practices, I want to take another audience reflection moment to think back on your own heat experience that you mentioned earlier, and was someone there or was a resource there to help you at key moments? If so, what did they say or do that made the difference? And I'm going to pause just for about 15 to 20 seconds as we encourage those of you to respond in the chat room. So I'm seeing some really great comments here. A mentor gave me options to try. Someone recognized my hard work, which someone showed a way to believe in me to keep me going. A peer was a great sounding board for me. But what we're seeing in some of these comments is someone, somewhere in the midst of the heat provides some kind of support that makes you recharge and overcome that burning sensation and give you more confidence to move forward. And we're going to talk about, well, what are ways to make that happen more consistently in the heat experiences your leaders might be going through in your organization. And we're going to use what we're calling a language of heat and heat levels to drive what kinds of support can be useful in different types of situations. We believe this language is useful to drive alignment around what kind of support is needed across line managers who may be tentative to speak out and ask for help, for leadership development practitioners, and CEOs who are often considering how to invest to make their organizations more agile. For level 1, we call it known problems and known solutions. Level 1 heat is something where the team has clearly identified what the problem is. They know solutions have existed. Other teams have succeeded at this, but they're just a little bit hesitant, lacking a little bit of confidence to pull the trigger and implement that solution. We have found that in this situation, often peer support can be enough to get people unstuck and moving forward. But in level 2 heat, we call it known problems but unknown solutions. And this is where solutions may exist in the industry, or solutions may exist for other people who have led a stretch assignment like my mentor who I got, but they're not known to the team itself. And in this situation, we're finding a different level, more dynamic level of support is often needed. But for level 3 heat, which we're calling unknown problems and unknown solutions, this is often when people are dealing with disruptive change, broad sweeping transformations to their organizations, business processes, and fundamentally the way the organization works. And this sort of heat, we believe, benefits most from a very different type of support. So here's a way to take the 3 heat variables, familiarity, complexity, and vulnerability or discomfort, and plot them out against the heat levels. Some examples of what that could look like in stretch assignments. For level 1, it could be creating a familiar change or improving the performance of a team, a process, or a product. And in this situation, we find what helps overcome the heat best are tools that are practical and easy to apply, which can often be role-played with help from peers. But for level 2 heat, when the solutions are not just at the edge of your fingertips or at the edge of your leadership network, and they're a bit more unfamiliar, we find that that team needs an infusion of new skills, and that leader needs an infusion of new skills that benefits both themselves and the team's ability to navigate the challenge. Examples of this can be whenever you're scaling fast or moving into new geographies, or when you're revising your operating models to become more lean and efficient. In these situations, which we see characterized very common in fast growth companies, leaders are experiencing level 2 heat that needs an extra level of support to make sure maximum learning is extracted and maximum course corrections are happening as fast as possible to minimize risky errors or costly mistakes. But for level 3 heat, which we're calling disruptive change, it's more than skills that we're finding people need. We're finding that they're needing a collective breakthrough. Not just 1 or 2 people have new skills that create alignment. The entire team has to find a breakthrough in how they approach communicating and working with each other, where they pay attention to, what they focus on, what they share with each other. Because the level of chaos increases exponentially with this kind of heat, and the predictions that the teams make grow more and more inaccurate over time, requiring them to cluster together and learn from each other more quickly. So what kinds of support have we found in our experiences in our research drives learning best? And here we're trying to mention what's the bare minimum support that can make learning effective. We're trying to think about what's a bit of an ROI, cost-effective way of doing it, not all potential ways. And these can be clustered and combined together. We're finding for level 1 heat, peer support and online learning tends to be enough to get people unstuck. But for level 2 and level 3 heat, there's often the need for more dynamic relationship that stabilizes the experience for people and stops them getting into fight or flight mode as they're analyzing what to do next. The power of a coach, and some people have already mentioned it in the chat room, is that they can help you listen better, process information around you better. They can help you get into learning mode and out of fight or flight mode. And most importantly, increase your confidence about what step to take next. For some leaders, they get into analysis paralysis mode and they wait too long to do anything. And for other leaders, they get into overbearing, trying to control the situation mode, and it turns people off on the teams they're leading. A coach helps analyze what to do next, evaluate alternate courses to take, and then helps figure out when to take them. And so for level 2 heat, we're finding the best bare minimum support is someone who's an expert, whether it's a qualified coach or a qualified mentor, and that they meet with a debrief frequency at least at critical times when the heat is highest. But for level 3 heat, we're finding that not just support for 1 or 2 people on the team is needed, because often everyone on the team in level 3 heat feels in over their head. And in these situations, we're suggesting use of a team coach, someone who everyone on the team during team meetings sees the presence of, and they become a stabilizing factor to create psychological safety and disrupt unhealthy communication patterns in the team. They essentially don't just inject life back into the leader, they inject life back into the entire team. And we encourage consistent debriefs to be set up ahead of time to navigate level 3 heat. And I'm going to illustrate that next with a quick story. So in this story, a Fortune 100 consumer goods company was undergoing a digital transformation to support shifting customer needs. And during the transition, the CEO decided, I want to give a heat experience to my chief marketing officer and combine some change initiatives with a talent development opportunity. And he transitioned the chief marketing officer of the organization to assume the role of a chief technology officer, even though that leader had no prior tech experience. The reason he did that was partly because the chief marketing officer was in touch with what the shifting customer needs were and knew what the size of the change was. It was truly level 3 heat, a massive change the technology department got to go through. But the CTO didn't understand any of the technical details that his leaders were sharing with him during team meetings. So it made it very difficult to create trust and create psychological safety on the team. As the stress was increasing, it became clear that team members were not listening to each other very well. And as the company migrated to a new shared services operating model, mistakes were made, some costs went up, and tensions were highest. And at this point, the leader was working with some L&D professionals to say, what kind of support do I need? This is getting a bit out of control. And they decided to set up 3 to 4 offsites scheduled over the course of a year with a team coach to debrief the situation and make sure that everyone had a safe sounding board to talk through how they can improve, because most people felt in over their heads. By having a one-day team offsite that was led by an external moderator to the team, a safe space was created to debrief what was working and what wasn't when trying to share information and give status updates to a technical leader who didn't understand 80% of the terms that managers were referencing. It gave a safe space to discuss missteps in the shared services establishment and to figure out what to do next to more effectively lead next. Over time, after a couple of team offsites, the team learned how to ask for help better, and the leader learned how to not spark fear into the rest of the team by always talking about the size of the change. After the first set of mistakes, the technology team got into an analysis paralysis mode and was afraid to make a next step without escalating things up to the leader. And the leader kept saying things like, well, the size and pace of change is massive. You need to hurry up and start implementing things. And it was going nowhere. So over time, after a couple of key debrief sessions, the team started talking about what its needs were. The team started feeling more empowered, and the leader changed his communication style about the severity and urgency of the change to no longer spark fear within the rest of the team. Over time, trust was rebuilt, the team communicated better, they finally set up the new shared services center effectively, which was able to cut costs and help the organization better meet the needs of its shifting customer base. The presence of the team coach helped mesh the different management styles between the marketing and tech leaders to overcome the analysis paralysis and become more effective. So this is not the only story we've experienced where team coaches can make a difference to accelerate learning amidst transformation or level 3 heat. We've seen it happen in lots of other situations. And we've seen clients who are experiencing deep turnover and rapid turnover during transformations on their teams stop that turnover because a coach provided a safe space to debrief what was going on. And people could expect, if there's consistent debrief set up, I know I'll get a chance to speak and be heard, and 1 or 2 people aren't going to crowd out the conversation. It led to increased commitment levels on other teams, as well as increases in listening and learning, and decreases in the brain being triggered into fight or flight mode by the heat. And so we're finding a bit of a heat playbook. And one executive said it best: when dealing with heat on the job or stretch assignment, it's important to lower the risk by drip feeding support at key moments. Yet when dealing with leaders in safe to fail places on a safe practice field, it's important to crank up the heat as much as possible and push them to their limits to create heat preparedness. And so now we're going to transition a bit away from stretch assignment and the heat from those and talk more about how you can get heat ready by having some practice time. And to do that, I'm going to ask for one last audience reflection. Can you think about a time in your career where you experienced safe practice time, where you were able to try on some new leadership techniques, get feedback on how well they worked? It felt relevant to what you were doing, but it was completely safe to make mistakes. Once again, I'm going to just pause for 20 or 30 seconds and see what people write in the chat room. So we can see some of the comments. Yes, with my executive coach, not much in my career, but yes, in a course. Unfortunately, no, not much in real life. And that's why we think there's the need for a practice field. And that's why we're trying to reframe experiential learning under the context and the language of heat. In my experience, when I tried to answer this question, my answer was I maybe had 10 hours out of all the management development, all the leadership development. I'm Green Belt certified in Lean Six Sigma, maybe 10 hours of actual practice time, not where I'm gaining information about new techniques, but where I'm practicing skills, getting feedback on those skills, and seeing the impact of how I'm using those skills. And so we'd like to say, we think one way to create more agility in your organization and help them better navigate heat is to better approximate heat by using experiential learning. And we are fascinated by some of the research by Anders Ericsson out there about deliberate practice. Some of you may have heard this concept popularized where it takes 10,000 hours of practice for mastery to occur. And we're finding that not only are leaders probably not getting enough safe practice, but they might not be getting the right types of safe practice. And in the research, Anders Ericsson pointed out that if you don't do practice where you have to take risks, where you have to learn from failure and you don't push your boundaries, if you're doing things where it feels kind of right at your level of comfort, your competitive edge tapers. He talked about how doctors can decline performance over their career because the learning that they're supposed to be doing over time often comes in the form of continuing education, not deliberate practice, where the difference is getting more information versus practicing actual techniques. And so we were exploring what are ways to practice techniques that feel safe and relevant to leaders where they can take risks and learn from them and it not be career threatening. And these are the three forms that we think approximate different heat levels: games, simulations, and expeditions. Games have been around for quite some time in the leadership development industry. And I think what we're doing here is trying to position what they can be useful for. They can be useful for helping teams try to solve a unique challenge where they have to collaborate despite lots of unknowns. And it gets them time to practice how to get teams to learn and adjust on the fly. So that variable of unfamiliarity and unknowns in the heat levers can be practiced here. For simulations, in this situation, teams are being asked to mirror real business realities, solve a business challenge, and make tough decisions without easy answers. In this one, often what they're wrestling with is complexity, not just unfamiliarity. And this helps leaders practice the impact of their decision-making and forecasting impact better real time. We're finding that there's another form of leadership development that we believe actually drives bigger mindset shifts in leaders and perhaps drives vertical development, and those are in the form of expeditions. They ask leaders to tackle complex and unfamiliar problems simultaneously, such as sailing a fleet or working on a pit crew. And it helps leaders deal with the emotions and the behaviors that come when you're actually feeling anxiety and fear to do something way beyond your comfort zone. So if you apply these to a heat grid, you can see and start to think about what are ways to leverage experiential learning to approximate different situations that your organization might be wrestling with. So if your organization is scaling into new regions and trying to learn how to collaborate in unfamiliar territory, the simplest thing you can do is offer to get them to play games that ask them to practice that same skill of wrestling with how to collaborate together. If you are changing your operating model or moving to shared service centers, and you have to get new customers to adopt very different ways of working with you, a simulation can be a great way to practice navigating that complexity. But if you're leading disruptive and transformational change, where you're getting turbulent reactions and you're encountering a lot of unpredictable steps to occur, sometimes we believe expeditions can simulate the intense emotions you feel when things don't go as planned and everyone might feel in over their head. We hope this diagnostic can be helpful for you to select the right learning vehicle for practice hours, about the right types of practice, but also not underestimate how critical it is to get the right type of support during practice time. And that's what we have listed under each technique here. We believe that for games and simulations to have powerful learning impact, transformational learning impact, they need to be debriefed by an expert. And for expeditions to be having a powerful mindset shift occur for leaders, they need to be debriefed by the team coach, or debriefs happening every couple of hours for every misstep that's being taken. When there's a relentless focus on debriefing, moments that are often overlooked by teams in the business world can be actually stopped, analyzed, and new techniques can be gained about what to do next. And it's this relentless debriefing that happens over and over again, even in places when teams would not have called a timeout to debrief it, that we believe accelerates vertical development. We have some great white papers out there about vertical development and this idea that a vertically developing leader is one who knows how to be effective in a variety of situations. They're not just developing skills, but they're learning where and how to apply those skills, tailoring them to different audiences. And what's interesting is some of the research out there suggests people and leaders, perhaps 38% of them, are probably operating from the style of leader as expert instead of leader as collaborator. And when they're in that style of leader as expert instead of leader as collaborator, they may have a big opportunity to have a moment's shift for them in a heat experience to realize the leadership style that they're engaging in is not the one that's going to work for everyone around us. And so, with that, I'd like to highlight a story where we accelerated vertical development to happen in an organization that was undergoing rapid change. In this story, we worked with a Fortune 100 technology company that was growing by acquisition and needed to change its culture to be more collaborative and less individualistic. Leaders were facing extreme heat at work and needing to practice making decisions that benefited the entire company, not just their own team targets. They were stuck in the mindset of, as long as I improve my revenues, that's all that's needed. But since they were now at a place where they needed to be more collaborative and they were seeking a more collaborative culture, they needed practice time to work against those old patterns and try to put on some new patterns. So CCL carefully customized a sailing expedition for teams to simulate aspects of their marketplace and culture on the open sea. With minimal training, leaders had to create a sailing strategy that maximized team and organizational performance while accounting for shifting wind conditions. Since no one was a sailing expert, team members had to trust one another and learn to lead through others. This covered a course of a number of days, and it was fascinating to see how the patterns of communication changed from day 1 to day 2 to day 3, where they had to make a lot of mistakes on day 1, learning basic sailing skills, learning how to navigate shifting wind conditions, and learn from those mistakes quickly. Instead of getting angry when people made mistakes, find a way to calm people down, because anxiety was palpable for leaders now taking the helm of a massive boat which they had barely any training for. And it made them realize the importance of learning from failure quickly and the importance of making sacrifices that benefit the whole group rather than pushing things forward just to benefit what you think is needed next. We've run expeditions in a number of situations for a number of different clients, whether it's sailing expeditions, whether it's pit crew expeditions, whether it's working with wild horses. There's lists of many, many different types of expeditions. where we've seen commonly experienced breakthroughs happen. And these are breakthroughs that happen for everyone on the team. Collective breakthroughs. And here's an example of some of them. Sometimes when I lose my own expertise and I need to feel like I want to be the smartest person in the room, it slows us down, doesn't leverage opportunities from people who have a different perspective. Sometimes I need to realize that failure can be an accelerator if it's a small failure, not a massive failure, and we can learn quickly from it, not fear it. Sometimes taking time out to debrief is worth the extra time. So many leaders have found the importance of calling a timeout, whether it's 5 minutes to get the team together, or calling a timeout such as the Fortune 100 consumer goods company with the team coach for a day. And at that time, it's worth it to realign and recommunicate on what's working and what's not. Some other breakthroughs have been, we just need to share information across silos faster and stop just focusing on our own silo, because this helps the whole organization realign and execute more quickly. And some people have had insights and groups of insights around, sometimes I avoid talking about my emotions, but maybe I need to talk about them sometimes, because this accelerates our ability to listen to others who are gripped by fear, know how to connect with them, and help give them the confidence to move forward. So with that, we'd like to give an opportunity to take a quick poll of how your organization is handling heat. We've listed a couple of the best practices out there. There's more than these out there, and we'd love to partner with more organizations to collect more and more examples of how to navigate, especially level 2 and level 3 heat. But right now, if you could just take a moment to answer these 3 questions in your poll, we can learn to see what's some great information from you as an audience. First question, what level of heat is most common in your org? Although it might be a combination of 3, if you could say which do you think has the highest percentage? Is your organization mostly struggling with level 1, 2, or 3 heat? Are your leaders getting the support they need to turn heat and stressful assignments into powerful learning? Yes, somewhat no. And what type of support are your leaders getting the most? We found that often leaders are not getting the support that's most dynamic that they need. So let's just do a quick pulse check to see what information we can glean from the audience currently about how they're handling heat. And once again, I'll just take about 15 to 30 seconds and pause while that happens. So we're starting to see some poll results come in. It sounds like the bulk of people so far are experiencing level 2 heat. They believe their leaders are getting somewhat the support they need, but not exactly the support they need. And the type of support they tend to be getting seems to be team learning events and individual coaching, and sometimes online learning. This mirrors what we've often learned in our experiences, that sometimes a team coach and individual mentoring is not leveraged as much as it could be to help accelerate people to navigate level 3 heat. And as I mentioned in my own story, an individual mentor who had coach-like behaviors is quite powerful. I think with that, we're going to move to one last comment and then a Q&A. So to summarize, heat can be career defining for people. It can impact people at the individual and organizational level, leading to burnout or transformation and transformational agility. The discomfort from it actually is what accelerates learning if you extract insight at key misstep moments. And that requires the right support to be there so that you don't fall prey to your brain overheating and not gathering the information it needs to learn. So we're finding that debriefing missteps is actually a game changer to grow vertically, not just horizontally, and that savvy organizations are using it in bold ways. With that, let's take a pause and see what's out there for a question and answer session.
Great, thanks, Chris. Yes, we've had some questions come in. I want to address one from Katerina. She wanted to know if you could speak about how finding a balance between reduced psychological safety and not reducing learning agility.
The question was how to have a balance, or what's the connection to them?
Yeah, how do you find the balance between reduced psychological safety and not reducing learning agility?
Yeah, I think if you don't have psychological safety, you fall victim to the brain experiencing tunnel vision and not listening to all things around it, and it doesn't learn. And so one example that can kind of hone that is if you have level 2 heat, known problems but unknown solutions, but you have lack of psychological safety, it's going to feel like level 3 heat. And so without psychological safety, it's very, very difficult to create learning across one person or across an entire team. And so measuring, tracking, having pulse checks about psychological safety can be a great method for L&D practitioners and others to say, does this team need a bit more support so it can be a little bit more effective to extract learning? I'm not sure if that completely answers the question, but it does try to highlight that without psychological safety, learning can be compromised just in the same way when your brain is in fight or flight mode, it can be compromised and not learn well. So it's critical to underestimate psychological safety in the learning process.
Thank you. We had sort of a combination of a question about what did the mentor that you had, what did they give you and how much was actually coaching? What did the mentor give you and how much was coaching?
Yeah. It's a great question. And so a mentor and a coach can engage in very similar behaviors. And the mentor played the role of a coach, but they also played the role of a consultant. And so that's why I called them a mentor. So they were a sounding board for me to sort out what was overwhelming to me, but they also were, and they were asking me powerful questions to try to unlock my own thinking. But when they saw that I was stuck and I didn't have any other solutions, they would provide tools that I could use to remap what to do next and that I would actually use with my team. And they provide tools that helped with feedback across the team. They provided tools to help with measuring results across all of our pilot sites. So we were piloting in 11 countries at once. And they helped provide tools to communicate results more efficiently to the executive level. And so the mentor provided, I guess I would say, not only tools, but coaching on how to use the tools, which are skills, to be more effective in key areas. And they also helped me learn and surface some blind spots that I wasn't paying attention to that might have been making things more frustrating for the team. And so the difference to me between a coach and a mentor is purely a mentor perhaps has led in the exact same situation you're in before. They have prior experience and prior success in that situation, so they can draw on that prior experience and success. A coach can still be just as effective, but they may not have ever been in the hot seat of leadership that leader is facing. And you can use coaching skills and mentoring skills simultaneously if you are a mentor.
Thank you. I got a question about what else could you do besides expeditions and high heat situations?
So on a safe practice field, something that simulates the emotions of feeling in over your head, the next thing is certain types of simulations, if they're the right kinds of simulations, get close to those emotions, but sometimes simulations stay at the intellectual level, not always at the emotional level. But we're curious about that question ourselves. This is an emerging field, and we'd love to find more people who have more perspectives about how to approximate level 3 heat that's not just expeditions, especially ways you could do that that are easy to scale. And so I don't have a great answer besides certain types of complex simulations if you're talking about a safe practice field and you're not talking about stretch assignments. And I'd love to have further dialogue about that topic because we're trying to learn those techniques as soon as we hear about new ones.
Chris, Mary Lisa would like to know about, for expeditions, are virtual expeditions as meaningful?
I don't have experience with a virtual expedition. I suppose that's have more of a conversation about, like, what would you do in a virtual situation? Would you try to be a coach to a team who's trying to change tires as a pit crew? Would you try to be a coach virtually to a team that's trying to set its sailing strategy or trying to influence a herd of horses to move in a new direction? I suppose you could probably approximate some virtual communication situations, and I know in our sailing experiences we've included a virtual component to them, but I don't know about a lot of people benefiting or the entire experience being virtual. It would be something I haven't heard of yet, and that would, to me, sound more like a simulation than an expedition where you're actually hands-on moving and doing things that are unfamiliar to you.
Right.
But I'm very curious to explore ways to increase virtual participation in an expedition.
Chris, how can you gauge how serious an organization is about practice relative to heat? It's one thing to say or encourage with a bunch of corporate jargon. It's another thing to do or witness.
It's a really great question, and we're creating heat diagnostics that you could use, and the white paper is going to give you a first cut at some questions that you can wrestle with and answer with your different leadership layers. But one thing you can do is just measure psychological safety and measure where the pockets of heat highest and where the psychological safety lowest, and see are leaders providing more opportunity to offer a coach or a team coach or more resources to those places to make sure learning is extracted faster and people are avoiding burnout. But I think it can start with measuring heat pockets and measuring psych safety levels and checking in to see if more resources are being provided to those places.
Chris, David asks, are there any best practices on how the debriefing results are compiled, maintained, and most importantly, how shared across the organization?
That's a great question. I think different organizations have different cultures, and it's hard to provide a one-size-fits-all approach for cascading best insights from one team to another team without recognizing ways that culture prefers to receive new information. And some cultures that are more collaborative, you can share information quite readily. But other cultures that are more hierarchical, if you try to share learning across an organization horizontally, it may not be received well, and it may be better to have those insights go up the chain and then down the chain for them to be effective. And so if the focus is on how to cascade insights across teams, I think recognizing what's going on in your culture is really important. I think if it's just for finding ways to cascade insights within the team, that's also something that's dynamic to the team culture, and something that why we're recommending a team coach is they can help figure out what's the right way to do it for your team. In the team coaching I've done in Level 3 Heat, and I've done it with 6 or 7 different teams, the way we shared insights was totally different depending on the culture. And so it's hard, I think, in that instance to figure out best practices that are universal across team cultures.
Thank you.
But if there are insights and cross-cutting themes that you found, we would love to learn about them.
Wonderful. We have reached the end of our time here. I want to thank you, Chris, for sharing how heat experiences can accelerate learning for leaders and help improve how they respond to high stress and high stakes situations. We hope our audience has enjoyed the session today. This will conclude our program, but be on the lookout for a follow-up email tomorrow, which will include a link to the webinar recording and our new white paper called Turn Up the Heat, Turn Up the Learning, and other future fluency resources. We hope that you've enjoyed this session and will join us again for a future webinar. As you exit the webinar, we'll hope you take a moment and complete an evaluation we'll push out to you so we continue to make these events well worth your time. You can also request that a CCL team member follow up with you. Once again, thank you for joining us, and Chris, thank you for delivering such a great session.
Thanks, everyone, and I really appreciate the great questions out there. I'm looking forward to more collaborations to push the heat movement forward.
All right, this concludes today's webcast. Thank you all for attending. We will send all registrants an email tomorrow with a link to the recording. And please visit our event calendar to sign up for future webcasts.